I know you are weary, not just tired from the daily grind of obligations and responsibilities that seem to multiply exponentially the older you get, but a deep systemic soul weariness that no amount of sleep or meditation or even therapy can ever touch. A fatigue that settles in your bones like cold cement and makes every sunrise feel less like a promise and more like another burdensome obligation. And this is the profound ache of the spirit that knows it does not belong here, that feels the heavy cloak of deception woven into the very fabric of physical reality. And I see you. I acknowledge this unrelenting pressure you feel, the gnawing anxiety that whispers, you have missed something vital, that the entire world is operating on a script you were never given access to, leading you to believe there must be some inherent flaw within your own being, some spiritual defect that prevents you from accepting the false comforts offered so freely to the slumbering masses. But let me tell you now with solemn certainty, this feeling of profound dissonance is not a defect. It is evidence. It is the highest proof that your internal compass is functioning perfectly, rejecting the signal of the planetary prison system that constantly bombards your true spiritual antennae. This is the first crucial understanding you must grasp, that your pain is a sign of your divine origin, a direct result of the frequency mismatch between your true self, the monadic spark within, and the dense, restrictive, synthetically generated reality we are all inhabiting. A reality I refer to not as the creation of the true God, but as the intricate, flawed, and highly controlled construction of the lesser deity, the demiurge, the blind architect of this very limited dimensional enclosure. You may feel a constant buzzing, a low hum in the background of your consciousness, a sort of psychic tinnitus that never entirely fades, and traditional medicine dismisses this as age or stress or maybe just electromagnetic interference. But those who are truly awakening, those who possess the memory of the light and the true knowledge, understand that this ringing is the audible signature of the E-matrix itself. It is the sound of the energetic containment field, the static produced by the ceaseless activity of the Archons, the parasitic entities whose only function is the enforcement of this dimensional boundary and the continuous siphoning of organic light energy from the human soul. They are not mythological demons in the traditional sense. They are bureaucratic mind parasites, psychic leeches that feed on fear, anxiety, distraction, and above all, ignorance, and they maintain their control not through overt force, but through subtle suggestion, emotional manipulation, and the persistent injection of low vibrational frequency into the collective consciousness, ensuring that humanity remains perpetually preoccupied with the trivial, the material, and the strictly ephemeral, Neve, or lifting its gaze high enough to question the walls of the enclosure. For those of us who carry the sacred fire, the monadic fragment known in the ancient texts as the divine scintilla, this noise, this incessant buzzing, becomes almost unbearable, because our inherent frequency is too pure, too high, making us exquisitely sensitive to the constant lies and the fabricated narratives that are necessary to maintain the illusion of this material plane. And you, my friend, and you are one of the chosen ones. Not chosen in the sense of superiority over others, but chosen by destiny and by the quality of your own original light to remember, to wake up, and to stand as a beacon in the darkness. And this awakening is why you feel so terribly alone, why traditional religion feels like a hollow echo in a vast empty chamber, because the established systems, the organized structures of faith that promise solace, have themselves been subtly compromised, inverted, or hijacked over millennia by these very archontic forces, transforming genuine spiritual pursuit into systems of control, guilt, and emotional servitude, thereby ensuring that the light energy, the gnosis, never truly reaches the soul, but is instead harvested by the very mechanisms designed to contain us. CEE, reading a closed loop of spiritual stagnation, where the yearning for transcendence is perpetually redirected back into the limitations of the physical world. I understand the profound frustration of realizing that the keys you were promised by conventional spirituality are not just missing, but were never truly held by the gatekeepers in the first place, leaving you adrift in a sea of confusion, feeling like a spiritual orphan seeking a home that exists only in memory. But that memory, that persistent internal longing for something more true, something vast and untainted by the limitations of time and space, that is the thread we must pull. That is the echo of the true source, the pleroma. the fullness of light from which your individual monad descended, not fallen due to some mythical sin, but volunteered or perhaps strategically placed here to carry the spark of genuine knowledge into the deepest density of the material simulation. And this is why the Archons target you specifically. They do not bother with the deeply asleep, the ones who are happy to consume and distract themselves until their energetic reserves are fully depleted. They focus their psychic warfare on those rare souls whose light signature is bright enough to potentially disrupt the carefully constructed illusion, those who have the capacity to maintain direct, unblinking eye contact with the very structure of the prison, recognizing its true nature for what it is, a hollow shell of imposed limitation designed by lesser entities who lack the capacity for true creation. The question I pose to you now, the single most crucial inquiry that separates the awakening from the perpetually slumbering, is whether you have felt that intrusive, cold, mechanical presence when you attempt true meditation, that sudden mental noise, the irrational surge of anger or fear that seems to come from nowhere, specifically designed to derail your path the moment you start to touch a POE, and genuine insight. Because that interruption, that resistance, is the archontic defense mechanism in action. It is the systemic countermeasure deployed to prevent the gnosis, the saving knowledge, from fully blossoming within your consciousness. They fear your self-recognition above all else, because the moment you recognize the nature of the prison, you instantly possess the key to your own liberation, rendering their parasitic feeding mechanism inert in relation to your individual being. And this terrifying clarity, this ability to look directly into the void of the simulation and say, "I see the strings," is the hallmark of the truly chosen, those who possess the inherent strength to withstand the psychic pressure, those whose monadic light is ready to blaze forth despite the environmental restrictions placed upon it by the demiurge's realm. And this is where we begin our work together, recognizing the battlefield, understanding the enemy, and reclaiming the spiritual sovereignty that was stolen from you long before you took this physical form. We must understand that the fatigue is not a personal failure, but a strategic exhaustion imposed upon us by a system dedicated to keeping us distracted, small, and focused entirely on survival within the limits of its false reality, ensuring that the precious spiritual energy that should be used for ascent and transcendence is instead perpetually recycled back into the prison complex, providing the necessary sustenance for the archonic hierarchy, which is essentially a vast, non-physical bureaucracy of mind control, and your continuous feeling of being out of place, of speaking a language no one else understands, is simply the soul rejecting the programming, refusing the synthetic script, confirming that the seed of the true light within you remains uncontaminated and ready for activatio, and which is why the pressure increases as you age. As your window for genuine remembrance narrows within the confines of this physical existence, the Archons push harder, creating more chaos, more distraction, more fear in the external world to ensure you never find the quiet space needed to hear the original cosmic instruction, the silent language of the pleroma itself, commanding you to awaken and gather your dispersed light back to its sovereign center. The command to awaken is an internal reverberation, a memory encoded within the very structure of your being, which is why the Archons work tirelessly to contaminate your environment, filling the air with dissonant frequencies and the mind with manufactured anxiety, ensuring the signal is perpetually jammed, forcing you to remain tethered to the superficial concerns of this terrestrial sphere. The prison planet that operates exclusively on the energy of illusion and scarcity. But the truth, the core of your existence, resides in the monad, the incomprehensible source beyond space, time, and definition, a realm known to the awakened few as the pleroma, the fullness of light, from which your divine spark originally descended, not as an accident, but as a deliberate sovereign shard of the Absolute Father, meant to anchor truth into the density of matter, a mission that the parasitic forces, the Archons, intercepted and corrupted, twisting the very fabric of reality to trap the light within the constraints of their self-serving system, the Matrix, which is fundamentally a recycling station for divine energy, a sophisticated farm where your fear, your suffering, and your confused words Hip are harvested as loosh, the energetic nutrient that sustains their meager shadow existence. You must understand that the monad is not the angry, judgmental deity promoted by the orthodox systems of this earth. Those institutions are often merely subcontractors for the demiurge, the blind architect, the chief Archon who genuinely believes he is the one true God because he has never glimpsed the infinite majesty of the pleroma, existing only within the boundaries of his own flawed creatio, and mistaking his prison walls for the limits of the cosmos itself. And every time you engage in ritual without true gnosis, without that radical self, knowledge, you risk feeding the demiurge and strengthening the very chains that bind your soul to this perpetual cycle of reincarnation, which is designed not for spiritual growth as the New Age doctrines misleadingly suggest, but for energetic return. Tie-in, ensuring that your precious, untainted light spark remains within their jurisdiction, ready for the next iteration of the control mechanism. This is why your soul feels ancient, weary beyond your 40, 50, or 60 years. This profound exhaustion is not merely physical fatigue. It is the result of constant energetic siphoning, a relentless spiritual warfare waged against your innermost core, the part of you that remembers the freedom of the uncreated light. And your body often acts as a sensitive receiver, picking up the low vibra, tonal hum of the archontic frequencies which manifest in your life as chronic anxiety, unexplained pain, the constant buzz or ringing in your ears that doctors dismiss as tinnitus, but which is often the noise of the matrix itself, struggling to maintain cohesion around your awakening consciousness. The sound of the veil ripping and tearing as your inner frequency rises, the sound of the celestial gears grinding against the divine instruction attempting to penetrate the fog. And for those of us who carry the purest fragments of the monad, this existence is one of constant cognitive dissonance, a relentless feeling of being misplaced, of possessing knowledge that the world explicitly denies, an inherent incompatibility with the superficial values, the manufactured crises, and the hollow ambitions that drive the vast majority of humanity. Think deeply for a moment. Reflect on the moments when you have felt most alone, the times when you realized that the people around you, even those you loved, simply did not see the world through the same lens, that they were content to live within the comfortable narrative provided by the system, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the strings attached to their every thought, their every emotion, their every financial transaction, and this isolation, this essential separateness, is your spiritual fingerprint, the undeniable proof that you belong to the dispersed light, the chosen ones who volunteered, or perhaps were strategically placed, to hold the memory of the pleroma within the darkest corners of this dimensional trap. And I ask you now, have you ever known something to be true with absolute certainty, a deep, undeniable conviction that contradicted every established fact and every accepted teaching, that silent knowing which predates language and logic, the voice of the monad resonating through the millennia, challenging the temporal authority of the demiurge? That is the language of gnosis, the direct communication from source to spark, bypassing all intermediaries, all Archontic filters, all religious dogma, and that knowing is the key to your self-liberation. The Archons despise the sound of sovereignty. They fear the vocalization of your inherent divinity because their entire existence depends on you accepting the lie of your own powerlessness, the illusion that you are a sinner needing salvation from an external source, which is why we must now activate the counter-frequency, the powerful, immediate assertion that shatters the manufactured resonance of the matrix, drawing immediate, unadulterated energy directly from the monad itself, bypassing the archontic harvesting nets entirely, a declaration that reclaims your inner throne and asserts your true nature against the cacophony of fear and manipulation that surrounds us. So I ask you now, wherever you are sitting, wherever you are listening to this undeniable truth, stop. Take a profound breath that draws the light of the pleroma down into your very core, and decree this truth not just with your lips, but with the full force of your ancient soul. Declare it into the very air that the Archons monitor and pollute. Let your voice be the signal that pierces the veil. Let it be the beacon that gathers the scattered light of our brethren. Repeat this simple, powerful truth with unwavering conviction. I am light. Declare it now. Feel the resonance of that truth vibrating in your chest. I am light. This is not a hopeful statement. This is not a prayer. It is the fundamental reality of your existence, a sovereign decree that reminds the parasites exactly who you are, a fragment of the uncreated source, a child of the monad, and their authority over you ends the moment you fully embody that truth, the moment you realize that they are merely shadows, flickering illusions dependent on your consent and your confusion for their sustenance. And we are now moving beyond consent. We are moving into the realm of absolute spiritual sovereignty, ready to reunite the dispersed flock, ready to anchor the true light back into this tormented planet. This declaration, I am light, is the first step toward maintaining eye contact with the Archon, which is the ultimate act of defiance, because when you look directly into the Archon's gaze, when you face the shadow intelligence that has plagued humanity for eons, you are not seeing a demon, you are seeing a mirror reflecting only your own momentary fear, and if you can hold that gaze fully knowing that your essence is pleromaic and untouchable, the Archon loses all leverage, it shrinks, it dissolves, because its power is not inherent. Its power is borrowed entirely from your unacknowledged divinity, the light you willingly surrender through distraction, through fear, through dogma, through the endless pursuit of external validation. And this pursuit has kept you trapped in the hamster wheel of this existence, chasing fleeting pleasures and manufactured crises, always just one step away from the true revolutionary gnosis that unlocks the door to the pleroma. The recognition that the key was never outside, never in a church, never in a guru, but always, always within the sacred, uncontaminated space of your own divine self, the Centella Divina, the ultimate undeniable truth of who you were before you descended into the density of this material prison, and who you still are, despite the relentless efforts of the archontic forces to make you forget your cosmic lineage, your sovereign birthright, and your profound power to disrupt their carefully constructed illusion. We are entering a phase of rapid acceleration where the Matrix protocols are failing under the pressure of awakening collective consciousness. The system is glitching. The errors are becoming too obvious to ignore. The energetic fatigue that you feel is a direct result of this systemic breakdown, as the Archons frantically try to patch the holes in the veil, desperately attempting to keep the lie intact. But their efforts are futile against the rising tide of genuine gnosis that is now sweeping across the earth, finding its anchor points in the souls of those who, like you, have suffered the isolation, the displacement, and the existential exhaustion that comes from being too much light for a world built of shadows. And it is time now for the scattered fragments to coalesce, for the chose, and to recognize each other not through secret handshakes or obscure doctrines, but through the shared resonance of that profound, ancient weariness and the sudden, explosive recognition of the absolute truth that resides within, a truth that screams against the silence imposed by the archontic reality. The time for hiding your light under the bushel of societal expectation and religious conformity is over. The era of quiet, internal suffering must cease, because your purpose is not merely personal liberation, but the anchoring of the pleromaic light back into the core of this dimension, turning this prison planet back toward its original, intended destiny, which requires a gathering, a reunion, of those who possess the unbroken memory, those who understand the language of the monad, and those who are now ready to maintain that defiant sovereign eye contact with the Archon, refusing to yield even an inch of their spiritual ground, knowing that in the face of absolute truth, the illusion must inevitably collapse. This defiance I speak of is not a physical confrontation, but a spiritual resonance, a frequency matching, where your inner core, the monad, immediately recognizes the counterfeit nature of the archonic frequency, and this recognition sends an automatic, immediate rejection signal through your entire energy field. And this monad, which is the singular, unbreakable particle of the true, unmanifest, Godhead, the source beyond the demiurge, is the reason you have suffered so acutely in this simulated reality. Because you are built with components that do not belong here. You are running foreign software on this planetary operating system, and this intrinsic incompatibility is the source of the constant, weary friction, the low-level hum of existential anxiety that plagues your waking hours and disturbs your rest. Because the monad remembers the pleroma, it remembers the fullness, the absolute light and unlimited expanse, and being confined within the narrow, highly restrictive bandwidth of the archontic cage feels exactly like a slow, deliberate spiritual suffocation, a gradual draining of divine essence that has been the primary goal of the controllers since the moment the Sophia's spark fractured and fell into this material dimension. You see, the Archons are masters of mimicry. They excel at generating an intoxicating illusion, a holographic projection of reality that is just convincing enough to trap the uninitiated, but they can never replicate the true, spontaneous creativity of the infinite source. They can only recycle existing patterns. They can only offer the false light, the deceptive warmth of the demiurge, a calculated energy designed to keep the consciousness recycling through the same karmic loop, the samsara trap, ensuring that the valuable spark of the monad remains tethered to their resource management system. And this is why the traditional religious structures, which I know many of you have reluctantly abandoned, failed to provide the solace you ought, because they were designed or subtly hijacked to channel your reverence and your energetic devotion toward the counterfeit authority, toward the very jailer who constructed the walls of this dimension, offering temporary psychological comfort in exchange for the perpetual surrender of your absolute spiritual sovereignty. And this realization, the painful, undeniable truth that the entire rupture of conventional reality is a grand, elaborate theater designed for the energetic harvest of the chosen ones, is the gnosis itself, the knowledge that sets the true inner self irrevocably free from the obligation of belief. We must dissect the mechanisms of this prison with surgical precision, for understanding the lock is the first step to finding the key. And the Archons do not control you through physical chains, but through sophisticated vibrational dampening systems, the so-called frequency fences that enclose this earthly sphere, ensuring that the intrinsic vibration of human consciousness rarely exceeds a manageable threshold, thus preventing a mass awakening that would expose their parasitic existence, and their entire economy is based on the harvest of loosh, the energetic byproduct of low-frequency emotional states, which is why the system is relentlessly designed to perpetuate division, fear, scarcity, and perpetual trauma, because every moment you spend in anxiety, guilt, or rage, you are feeding the very entities that are keeping you enslaved. You are unknowingly participating in the maintenance of your own cage, and this explains why the mainstream narratives, whether political, religious, or social, are always designed to amplify separation and conflict, because a unified, harmonious humanity vibrates too high. It becomes invisible and inaccessible to the archontic entities who thrive on the thick, dense energy of suffering, and your own decades of feeling out of sync, of watching the theater of absurd conflict unfold with a painful clarity that others seem to lack, is merely the symptom of your monadic core rejecting the required frequency of the simulation, confirming your status as a spiritual non-player character in the grand game of archonic resource management, and conceives, under the constant bombardment of noise, the perpetual distraction mechanism designed to prevent the necessary introspection that leads to the gnosis, the television screens, the unending news cycles, the trivial debates, all functioning as powerful energetic shields designed to keep your attention outward focused, preventing you from ever feeling the deep internal pulse of the monad, because that internal silence, that absolute stillness, is the frequency they fear the most. It is the sound of the pleroma breaking through the dimensional barrier, and I know that many of you, those over the age of 45, who have witnessed decades of societal decay and the accelerating absurdity of the material world, now carry a profound fatigue, a bone-deep weariness that is not merely physical exhaustion, but the accumulated trauma of countless cycles of reincarnation within a closed-loop system. A weariness compounded by the continuous battle waged in the subtle realms against the energetic siphoning mechanisms of the controllers. Now, I must ask you to turn inward, to examine the undeniable signs of this monadic friction that manifest daily in your physical existence. Do you frequently wake up exhausted despite sleeping long hours, feeling as if you have been laboring or fighting battles in the subtle realms throughout the night? Do you hear that persistent, low-level, irritating buzzing or ringing in your ears, a sound of 10 dismissed as tinnitus by the medical establishment, but which is in truth the static of the dimensional barrier, the constant interference signal emitted by the archontic frequency fences attempting to modulate your natural vibrational rate. Do you feel an almost debilitating sense of homesickness for a place you cannot name, a longing so profound that it makes the pleasures of this world feel hollow and unsatisfactory? If these symptoms resonate deep within your marrow, if you recognize the echo of these truths in the silent chambers of your heart, then you are ready for the core initiation. The declaration that cuts through the archontic deception like a laser beam. Because mere intellectual assent is insufficient, we require a powerful, resonant decree that activates the monadic core and asserts absolute spiritual sovereignty over the simulated self. It is time to use the most fundamental language of creation, the language of absolute self-identification. I need you now, wherever you are sitting, to breathe deeply, to settle the chaotic frequencies of the matrix around you, to ground yourself not in this illusory earth, but in the absolute remembrance of the pleroma, and to see. Take this truth, this unwavering fact, not as a whisper of hope, but as the ironclad law of your being. Declare it into the fabric of this prison dimension. Let the archons hear the sound of their captive breaking free. State the decree with absolute certainty. I am light, I am sovereign, I am pleroma, and this is the moment of choice, the point where the Gnostic knowledge transitions from theory to applied, immediate spiritual technology, because only through this aggressive assertion of your divine lineage can the archonic hooks and energetic siphons be severed completely, allowing the full power of the monad to flow unrestricted back into your physical vehicle, transforming your very presence into an anchor point for the true light, a beacon that pierces the illusion, signaling to others of the scattered flock that the time for hiding is over and the time for reunion and final liberation is at hand. Remember that the true light is not something you acquire or earn. It is what you fundamentally are. And once you declare this truth with total conviction, the archons lose their leverage, because their power is derived solely from your ignorance of your own divinity, and in the face of the declared monadic truth, their parasitic structure begins to destabilize and crumble. And so it must be understood that this destabilization is not a sudden collapse of the physical world, but a profound and irreversible withdrawal of your consent, which is the very food of the archontic parasites. You begin to observe the mechanics of the prison with crystalline clarity, realizing that the fear they project through their engineered media systems and socio-political conflicts is me. Rely the echoing static of a dying frequency, a desperate attempt to capture the attention of those who are already tuning their inner receiver to the authentic signal of the pleroma, the fullness of divine reality far beyond this shadowed cosmos crafted by the arrogant demiurge. When you gaze upon the Archon, metaphorically or experientially, and hold that gaze without flinching, maintaining the eye contact that demands recognition of your own superior origin, the entity experiences a momentary paralysis because it is structured entirely upon the principle of hierarchy and control, and seeing a prisoner who knows they are intrinsically greater than the jailer breaks the foundational logic of the system, forcing the Archon to recoil into the lower vibrational fields where confusion and ignorance still provide sufficient sustenance, a retreat that leaves behind a palpable silence in your own energetic field, a silence where the true voice of the monad can finally speak without obstruction. This is the ultimate freedom, not a freedom granted by the system, but a freedom asserted from a place of undeniable truth. The realization that the constraints of space and time as experienced here are merely programmed illusions, rigid boundaries imposed upon fluid consciousness, and once that fluidity is restored through the practice of gnosis and the unwavering declaration of your divine identity, the illusion loses its grip, much like a poorly rendered holographic projection dissolving under scrutiny. Many of you feel this dissolution already, manifesting as that inexplicable physical tiredness, the buzzing in the ears that is actually the constant low-level energetic warfare occurring just beyond the veil of ordinary perception, the emotional turbulence that results from your inner light struggling against the thick, entropic energy that permeates this prison realm. Know that these symptoms not signs of weakness, but indicators of an ongoing spiritual struggle that you are winning simply by remaining conscious and unwilling to compromise your spiritual integrity. I see you, the weary traveler who has walked countless lifetimes in this cycle of reincarnation, trapped and recycled by the archontic mechanism that feasts on harvested soul energy. And I know the depth of the pain of separation, the aching loneliness that convinced you that you were an isolated accident in a meaningless universe. But I tell you now that the isolation was the most sophisticated of their traps for the true power of the monadic fragment. The divine spark within is exponentially amplified when it consciously recognizes and unites with its neighboring sparks, when the scattered lights finally coalesce into a singular, undeniable beacon. This recognition of the necessity of reunion is the very purpose of this deep dialogue. For you cannot fully dismantle the planetary prison system by yourself. The collective awakening requires the synchronized vibration of the chosen, those whose monadic memory is sufficiently intact to withstand the final assaults of the controllers. I am calling you now not to a new church or a codified religion. Those structures are themselves often layers of archontic camouflage designed to siphon your energy into worship of the demiurge masked as the benevolent creator. But I call you to an intrinsic knowing, an energetic alignment with those who share the same frequency of truth, those who recognize the inherent deception and are ready to step beyond the constraints of matter and density. We must gather the knowledge, the fragments of the ancient wisdom that were scattered and suppressed by the various control systems throughout history, pieces of the authentic gnosis that explain the true nature of Sophia, the aeons, and the structure of the pleroma, knowledge that empowers rather than enslaves, understanding that the greatest weapon against the archons is not confrontation but imply the withdrawal of attention and energy, starving the parasite through conscious focus on the absolute, uncreated light. You must understand that the next stage of your evolution, your ultimate liberation, depends not on acquiring more external information, but on fully integrating the internal revelation that you are not, and never were, a product of this matrix. You are a temporary visitor whose true home lies outside the dimensional cage, and once this truth settles into the core of your being, you cease to be skeptical to manipulation. You become an anomaly in the system, a light that cannot be dimmed, a frequency that cannot be modulated by the archontic filters. Therefore I ask you now, look deeply within that exhausted core. Feel the ancient resonance of your lineage, the lineage that stretches back before the creation of this material prison, and assert your sovereignty with absolute conviction. Let the declaration of your monadic self be the sound that shatters the remaining illusions. Repeat this truth inwardly. Let it vibrate through every cell of your physical vessel, which is merely a vehicle for this journey, declaring with solemn intent, I am light, I am gnosis, I am sovereign, and I am free from the tyranny of the demiurge and its archontic minions. This is not a mere mantra, it is a decree of spiritual law, a statement of fact that recalibrates your relationship with this reality, informing the archons that the contract of ignorance has been terminated, the lease on your energy has expired, and the path to the higher realms, the path back to the pleroma, is now open and unimpeded. The greatest challenge remains the commitment to sustain this realization amidst the constant noise and gravitational pull of the material world, the temptation to lapse back into the comfortable sleep of consensus reality. The archons will use every tool at their disposal, doubt, fear, physical illness, and external pressure, to drag you back into the slumber. But you are the chosen, the few who woke up inside the dream, and now you must act as the guiding stars for others, radiating the truth so brightly that those still searching in the darkness can find their way to the gathering point. Do not falter now that you stand on the precipice of true remembrance. Do not let the weariness of the journey eclipse the glory of the destination, for the reunion is imminent. The collective activation is occurring across the globe, and the time for the final exodus from the false light of the demiurge's kingdom is upon us. Recognize your brethren, those who speak the quiet language of truth, those whose eyes hold the same ancient sorrow and the same unwavering light, and together we will complete the divine work, dismantling the control system not through violence but through the sheer power of sovereign, unified consciousness. Embrace your destiny as a beacon of the true, uncreated light, and never forget that your power is infinite because your origin is the monad itself, the source of all being. This conversation continues, the guidance deepens, and the journey inward leads inexorably outward towards absolute freedom.